Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Lucas, managing editor of the Knitting Circle, and I want to welcome you to today's live event. In this video, I'm going to be showing you all the steps you need to know to make these fingerless mitts, the Luminance fingerless mitts. And it's a really easy pattern. Don't let the cables deceive you. These are actually sort of mock cables or faux cables. So there is not a cable needle in sight. So before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that you can go ahead and download the free pattern for these fingerless mitts. And you will see that link either in the chat box or in the description of where you are watching the video. So you can go ahead and download it, and then you can make a pair for yourself or someone you love. So that's all I wanted to say about the pattern. Don't forget, we do have that chat box. So if you have any questions along the way, be sure to drop them in that chat box. I will try to get to as many questions as I can over the next little bit while we're working on this fingerless mitts pattern. And then also, I always love if people can just drop a little hello in the chat box. Let us know maybe where you're watching from. I also like to know if you're knitting or crafting while you're watching. Just let us know what you're working on, because I'm always curious. And then if you're planning on making these, maybe who you're going to make them for, maybe you're going to make them for yourself, maybe you're going to make them for somebody else. I'd love to know. And again, if you have any questions, just be sure to drop it in the chat box. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera face down so that you can see my hands, and we'll get started. So here we go with the fingerless mitts. Let's just take a look at them quick. So this particular yarn that I used is a long color repeating yarn. So I have a ball of it right here. And so in this ball, the colors are on these really long repeats. So you can see that, like, I have this whole chunk of green, this whole chunk of purple. And so for this particular size that I made, I did just use one ball of this yarn, and the specific yarn I used is listed in the pattern. And I really liked the idea of these fingerless mitts not matching, like they match, but they don't, they're fraternal twins, not identical. Because it's obviously, we've got matching orange, the pink, we got a little purple over here, and just barely a hint of green on this one. But I liked the idea of kind of doing something a little different. I'm often making things that are matchy, matchy, matchy. And so with these, you just use the one ball or two if you make a larger size, and you can make these beautiful mitts. So if you did want your fingerless mitts to match, before we talk a little bit more about the materials, you will definitely then need two balls of the yarn. So again, depending on the size, you might need one or two balls, but if you're doing the smaller size that only calls for one ball of yarn, if you do want them to match, you're going to have to buy two balls of yarn and then figure out where your starting point wants to be, because with skeins of yarn like this, it's not like if you pull the yarn out, it's always starting at the same exact spot in the color repeat, if that makes sense. So if you do want them to match and you do use this particular yarn, you're going to have to do a little bit of work to find the spot in your skein of yarn that will make them such that they match. So hopefully that makes sense. But let's talk a little bit about the materials in general. So this is a DK weight cotton yarn. So that is obviously what I used for the fingerless mitts. Or you could maybe get away also with a light worsted. This yarn is a cotton yarn, so I thought that this would be a good yarn to use for this project. It is still summer here in North America. It's pretty hot still. But as we start thinking about fall, cotton would still be good for that. Also, I really love this yarn. It's really, really soft. It's not itchy. I'm somebody that can get a little itchy with the wool. So this is a really nice yarn to use for somebody that maybe doesn't use animal fibers or doesn't wear animal fibers, or it makes them itch, or they have an allergy to it. And yeah, this is very inexpensive yarn. And so you can make a beautiful project for pretty cheap. So in addition to the yarn, of course, we need some needles. The pattern calls for a set of 5 double pointed needles, US size 5. or the needles for your preferred method for small circumference circular knitting. So I have decided for my project today that I am going with a circular knitting needle. And this is a US size 5. I am going to be knitting this project using the magic loop method. That is just my preferred method for small circumference knitting, but you use whatever you like. If you want to use the double pointed needles, great. You want to use magic loop, great. You want to use 2 circulars, that it's all great. Basically, all of it's great. And then in addition to that, we just need, the usual suspects. We have stitch markers. We're going to need 3 stitch markers, and I recommend that 2 are of one color and then the third one is a different color. And the reason for that being that one is going to mark the beginning of our round, and then these other 2 stitch markers we are going to use when it's time to do the thumb gusset. So our fingerless mitts here, we have this gusset. We're going to be adding some extra stitches in, and so we're going to be marking the stitches on either side. So then other than the stitch markers, we're going to need some waste yarn or stitch holders. So after we're done working those stitches in the thumb gusset, we're going to hold them off to finish the thumb at the end of the project. And so I like to use waste yarn for that. But you could also use a little stitch holder, or even your locking stitch markers will work in a pinch. And then you just need, scissors, your tapestry needle, just the usual things that you need for your project. So now let's go ahead and get started on casting on. So I'm going to use a slightly different yarn here. I'm going to just use a solid color yarn, just so everything's a little bit easier to see as we are working. And then I'm also going to be casting on fewer stitches, just so you don't have to watch me work long rounds. But just keep in mind that the exact size and number of stitches that you are going to cast on for your pattern are listed in the pattern. So the pattern, let me just find the exact sizes here for you. So the pattern is written for adult sizes, small, medium, large, and extra large. And so that is measured at the hand circumference right about here. So that's 7, 8, 9, and 10 inches in circumference. And so that's how you'll decide what size you want to make. Now, the pattern repeat for this is a multiple of 5 stitches. So you do have some wiggle room if you have more yarn and you feel comfortable adapting a pattern. Just know that the stitch pattern here, you need a multiple of 5 stitches to do your mitts. And also the gauge listed in the pattern is 5 stitches per inch. It's 20 stitches equals 4 inches. And so that equates to 5 stitches per inch. And so because it's 5 stitches per inch, if you're going to add or subtract any extra stitches out of your mitt, just know that every 5 stitches, you're either going to add an extra inch in or take away an inch, depending on which way you're going. So this one's pretty easy to adapt to whatever size you want. You just might have to play around with the thumb gusset a little bit. Okay, so let's start now with casting on. I'm going to be starting by casting on using the German longtail cast on. If you've joined us for other videos, you've probably seen me do this so many times now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I've wrapped my yarn around my needle 15 times. I'm going to estimate this as 10 stitches I need for my cast on. And then I would fold it over again for 20, 30, and so on. I'm just going to cast on 20 for this little mini swatch to demonstrate all the parts of the pattern. But you would obviously just make your tail longer for the size you're making. And then I do like to add in just a little extra just to be on the safe side. We're going to go ahead and make that slip knot. Now, with the German twisted cast on, we do have a video for it on the Knitting Circle website if you need to review it. And remember, you can always come and watch the replay of this later as well. But to do the German twisted cast on, you're going to orient your hands such that like you're going to do a long tail cast on. So I have the long tail coming over my thumb, and then my working, the yarn that's going to my working yarn is going over my index finger. And so now to do the German twisted cast on, we're going to go under both, through the loop on my thumb, around the yarn on my index finger. You can see here, this is making a cross right here on my thumb. We're going to just bend my thumb to uncross that loop, bring the yarn through and pull tight. So let's see, Lillian has a question, 15 twists and 10 stitches. Okay, so I think you're talking about the gauge. So it's 5 stitches per inch. So the so the gauge is 5 stitches per inch, and in a knitting pattern it's listed typically over 4 inches. So 5 times 4 is 20. So the gauge in the pattern is 20 stitches, and 32 rounds equals 4 inches. So that means that 5 stitches per inch is the gauge that we're getting. And then we need a multiple of 5 stitches on the needle. The exact stitch count is listed in the pattern. But what I was trying to explain was that if you wanted to make your fingerless mitt larger or smaller, you could either add or subtract stitches in multiples of 5. So if you wanted a smaller circumference, instead of 35 stitches, maybe you cast on 30. So we're going to just continue with this German twisted cast on. Again, going under both loops on the thumb, or both strands on the thumb, through the loop on the thumb, around, pick up the yarn on the index finger, uncross the loop on our thumb, bring the needle through the loop, and pull tight. So we'll just keep working that until I have the number of stitches that I want. Oh, I think I just understood Lillian's question. So 15 twists around the needle for the cast on and 10 stitches. So yes. So when I'm estimating my tail for the long tail cast on, I wrap the yarn around 10 times and estimate that at 10 stitches. It's 1 for 1 when I'm estimating for a regular old long tail cast on. For the German twisted cast on, I like to twist or wrap the yarn around the needle 15 times instead of 10, because the German twisted cast on takes a little bit more yarn than the long tail cast on. And so I don't want to run out of yarn in my cast on. So I think I just misunderstood your question. You weren't talking about gauge. You were asking about me wrapping the yarn around the needle when I was starting my German twisted cast on. The reason I like to start with the German twisted cast on is that it is more stretchy, and I like the way that it looks with a ribbing pattern, which is what we're going to be doing first. So let's just see how many stitches we have here, because I've been yapping and talking and not counting. 2, 5, 7, 10, 12, 15, 18. So we need 2 more. 19 and 20. So again, I'm making mine a little bit smaller, but you would just use the stitch count that you need in the pattern. And you can see here that my tail is maybe a little bit long. So I might just grab my scissors and trim it a little bit. But just remember, it's always better to have too much yarn tail than not enough, right? In most cases anyway. Okay, so now for the magic loop. And again, you can use your double pointed needles or your 2 circulars or whatever you like to do. I'm going to split half my stitches. So 2, 5, 7, and 10. I'm going to bring it onto the cord and fold. And then pull that cord at the halfway point so that both halves are up on the needles, just like this. So we have 10 back here, 2, 5, 7, 10, and then 2, 5, 7, and 10. Okay, we want our working yarn to be on the back needle. And then to magic loop, we're going to pull the back needle out, leaving a loop over here on the left, and then bring it around like this. So what you're left with is 2 loops on either side. And now we're ready to start our ribbing pattern. And our ribbing pattern is knit 3, purl 2. So I'm just going to insert my needle. That's 1. And my yarn's a little splitty there. That's 2 and knit 3. Now we're going to purl 2. So I've brought the yarn to the front and purl 2. And we're just going to do that all the way around. Just keep on going. When you get to the end, if you're doing the magic loop, when you get to the end of one needle, we're just going to flip it over, pull the loop to the left, and push these stitches up onto the needle. Now I'm looking here, I just want to make sure I don't have a twist or anything. Okay, I think we're doing good. So now we're going to pull that back needle out and around and keep going. So knit 3, purl 2. The reason I chose this ribbing for this particular pattern is that the actual mock cable or faux cables, whatever you want to call it, is worked over 3 stitches. And so and actually part of the pattern involves doing knit 3, purl 2. So I wanted to continue that into the ribbing of the fingerless mitt, just so it would flow nicely. Let me grab one of my mitts here. So we're down here, we cast on here at the bottom, and now we're going to work our way up. And you can see where I have my knit 3, it just flows right into that stitch pattern. So that's what we want to do here. So let's just go ahead and work another round. I'm going to take my stitch marker at this point. I usually work 1 round and then place my stitch marker. I don't know why I do it that way. That's just the way I do it. But you place your stitch marker whenever you want to place your stitch marker. You can also use your tail to keep your place if you like to live dangerously, like I often do. Okay, so let's just get our yarn here. So if we don't get it caught in the loop, there we go. And now we're going to knit 3 and purl 2. And so you would just keep repeating this for the number of rounds specified in the pattern. So the pattern's going to tell you to repeat for 11 more times. So you're going to be doing this little ribbing pattern at the beginning for a total of 12 rounds. So now we're just going to the other side. And continuing our ribbing pattern. Okay, almost to the end here. So again, you would just keep repeating that ribbing pattern for as long as the pattern specifies, total of 12 rounds. And then you're going to be ready to start the actual mock cable. I called it a mock cable rib pattern in the actual PDF. So we're going to just start that. We're going to just arrange our needles here. So we're ready for the magic loop. So the first round, what we're doing here is on round 1 of this cable pattern, we're going to be decreasing stitches. So we're going to be slipping a stitch and passing it over. So we're going to be reducing our stitch count, and the stitch count at the end of round 1 is listed in the pattern. And then on round 2, we're going to be adding a yarn over in, and then that will get our stitch count back to the original stitch count. So let me show you how that works. So round 1 of the pattern is we're going to slip 1 with yarn in back. And so in this pattern, a slip is slipped purlwise, and that's noted in the abbreviation. So my yarn is in the back. So it's behind my needle, my right needle, and I'm just going to slip 1 purlwise, just like that, knit 2, and that's 1. That's 2, and then we're going to pass the slip stitch over. So PSSO, pass slip stitch over, like that. And what I've done here is I've basically stuck my 2 knit stitches through that slip stitch. So the slip stitch is going around the 2 stitches. And then we're going to continue by purling 2. And you would repeat that all the way around. Slip 1 with yarn in back, knit 2, pass the slip stitch over, bring the yarn to the front for a purl 2. I'm flipping to the other side of my magic loop. And we'll just keep working that all the way around for round 1. Slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back, knit 2, pass the slip stitch over the knit 2, and then purl 2. So at the beginning of the mock cable rib pattern, I had 20 stitches because that's what I cast on for this little swatch here that I'm making. And so because I'm doing magic loop, I had 10 stitches on each half. So after I cast on and worked the ribbing, I just had 10 stitches on the front and 10 on the back to have 20. But look now, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I took my stitch count from 20 and went down to 16 because we passed that slip stitch over there. So now for round 2, we're going to increase our stitch count back up to our original stitch count. So we're going to knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, and then purl 2. And if we take a look at this, where we've added that yarn over is right between those 2 knit stitches that we had then passed the slip stitch over. So let's do that again. So see here, I have my 2 knit stitches. Here's the slip stitch that I had passed over them. So it's knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. So that should be happening just right over that slip stitch that you passed, and then purl 2. Coming to the other side. In the second half of our stitches, same thing. Knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, purl 2. Knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, purl 2. That takes care of round 2. For rounds 3 and 4, we're just doing the same ribbing we did at the beginning. We're just doing a knit 3, purl 2 all the way around for rounds 3 and 4. So when we're coming to our yarn over here, we're just going to stick our needle in just like it's a regular knit stitch. So you're just working in this way. Resist the urge to go in this way. That'll close the yarn over. We want to keep it open because I do like having that little hole there. Again, these are not, these are kind of transitional mitts getting us ready for fall and winter. So I think having a little lace in there where they're kind of open is still nice. These might not be the mitts for cold winter because we are intentionally putting a hole in them, but it's a nice little detail and they will help keep your hands and wrists warm as we transition to the fall here in the Northern Hemisphere. And so we'll just finish off round 3 here with our knit 3, purl 2, knit 3, purl 2. And then round 4 is exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead and work that quickly. And so while I'm working this, I just want to remind everybody, if you are coming in late, I'm currently working on the Luminance Fingerless mitts, and they are a free pattern that you can download. The link to the download is in the description where you are watching this. And so you can go ahead and grab the pattern and then follow along and then knit a pair of mitts for yourself. And don't forget, if you have any questions, be sure to go ahead and drop those in the chat box or let us know where you're watching from as well. I always love to know. So here I am finishing up round 4 of the pattern. And then you would just keep repeating these 4 rounds for the specified number of times in the pattern. So you're going to do that and then work an additional 2 rounds. So let's work those first 2 rounds again, and then we'll be ready to work our gusset. So for round 1, we're going to slip 1 with yarn in back, and our yarn's already in the back. Knit 2, pass the slip stitch over the knit 2, and then purl 2. Slip 1 with yarn in back, knit 2, pass the slip stitch over the knit 2 and purl 2, and work that all the way around. And you can see, because I'm doing the magic loop and I just purled, my yarn maybe wants to naturally come in front of my needle. What I always do is I scoop my right needle under the yarn like this to get it into position. And then if I need the yarn in back or I'm going to knit, then my yarn's already in the right place. So slip 1, knit 2, pass the slip stitch over the knit 2. And I've got that one more time on this little swatch. And that takes care of round 1. And now for round 2, this is where we increase our stitches count. We increase our stitch count back up to the original stitch count in the pattern. So round 2, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, purl 2. And this would be the place where if you are going to alter the pattern further, if you want to make your mitts longer or shorter, this would be the place to do it. So let me just finish off this last round 2, and then I'll bring my mitts back in. Add that yarn over. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's take a look at our mitt. I'll bring this one in this time. Okay, so the pattern's going to tell you to repeat rounds 1 through 4 and then repeat rounds 1 and 2 again. But you can repeat rounds 1 through 4 as many times as you like, as long as you then end with a round 2 before you start the thumb gusset business over here, which we're going to do in just a second. So just keep that in mind. If you want them to be a little bit shorter, let me stick this on. So I like my fingerless mitts to come maybe about, I don't know, maybe like a third to halfway up my forearm. And I find that that's a good fit for not having to do any further shaping. If you want your fingerless mitt to say come all the way up, you can't even see my elbow, come all the way up to my elbow. For some people, depending on your arm, you may need to add some increases in, well, you would have to start with more stitches and then I guess decrease down because we're starting here and working this way. So for me, I think that this length is good where you can keep the stitch count the same. It's a little more stretched out here, a little less stretched out here. But if you did want to add in some more repeats, you could. If you did want them to just be a little bit shorter and almost like the length of like just a glove where it just, you know, kind of starts right here, you could do that and just work less repeats. So that's really up to you. Just need to keep in mind if you're adding anything, you need to have more yarn. That's always the key. So Lillian has another question. Is this pattern for intermediate or experienced knitters? I would say that this one is for an intermediate knitter. We are doing a little bit of shaping as far as the thumb gusset goes. We have these slip stitches and we're changing the stitch count. But I don't think that it's anything too hard. I think even an adventurous beginner could do okay with this pattern, actually. Because you can always just come back and watch the video again, depending on your skill level. So this is one where I was able to knit one mitt in just a few hours. It didn't take me very long at all. So if you are an experienced knitter, this is a great project because it's not going to take you long at all to make it, that you can get it done pretty fast. Okay, so now at this point, let's talk about making the gusset, and I'm just going to continue on my little swatch here to work the gusset. So the next step is in the gusset pattern, we are going to now work in established pattern. And so I have noted in the pattern that we should be starting with round 3, which we are. And so we are going to work an established pattern to 1 stitch before the end. So we're on round 3, which is just knit 3, purl 2. And so we're going to work that established pattern until we're 1 stitch away from the end. Flip it over, coming to the other side. And we will work until we are 1 stitch from the end. Okay. So we are 1 stitch away from the end. And so now we are going to place a marker, excuse me, not place one. We're going to place a marker and then make 1. So I'm going to take my stitch marker, slip it on the needle, and now make 1. To make 1, I am going to lift the strand in between the 2 stitches. So it's this strand right here. And so we're going to lift the strand from front to back and then knit into the back of it, just like that, to make our make 1. And then we'll place our next marker and then end with a purl 1. And so what we've done here now is we've created the first stitch of our thumb gusset. So we increased 1 extra stitch. Now we work round 2 of the gusset, which is work an established pattern to the marker, which again, now we're on round 4. So this is the trickiest part of the pattern. This is a little bit where you're kind of doing sort of an at the same time sort of situation. So you're continuing in the established pattern while at the same time making the gusset. So this is something where if you, have printed out your pattern, you could take some notes on it, or whatever you need to do to keep track of your work. But at least this pattern's pretty easy with only the 4 round repeat. So it's pretty easy to keep track of where you are with this particular pattern. So the next round of the gusset is just working in the pattern, which is round 4, to the marker. And then SM, which is slip marker. So we slip the marker, knit 1, slip marker, purl 1. And then we're going to just continue working the gusset. So the next part of the gusset, we're going to continue working in the established pattern. So we'll be back at round 1. And then we're going to increase in the gusset again. So I'm going to go ahead and work round 1 and get us over to the gusset. And while we're doing that, we have a question from Margaret. And Margaret asks, what length of needles are you using? So today I actually have a 24-inch circular needle to do my magic loop, which, to be honest, is not necessarily my preferred length for doing magic loop. So I tend to like a 32-inch circular better, just because I find that this, tight, maybe not, might not be the right word to describe it, but I like the loops to be a little bit bigger when I'm doing the magic loop, and especially if I'm doing a full size one. Here where I'm just making a little swatch, a 24-inch length for the magic loop works okay. But for, you know, the full size mitt, I did have to use a 32-inch circular. And actually, I think I have another step on the needles, and I think that one, nope, that one's on a 24-inch too. My 32-inch circular must be in another project. You know how that goes. Okay, so we're continuing here to work our pattern to the gusset. And now we're at the gusset. And now the next instruction here for round 3 of the gusset says slip marker, make 1, knit to marker, make 1 again, slip 1 and slip marker, and then purl 1. So for this first round, there's only 1 stitch to knit to the marker, but on subsequent rounds, then you'll be knitting more stitches to get to the next marker. So let me show you what I mean. So we're going to slip 1, slip marker, make 1, lifting that strand up from front to back, knitting into the back of it. And now it says knit to marker. So we're just going to knit to the marker. In this case, it's only 1 stitch, but again, in subsequent rounds, it'll be more stitches, and then we're going to make 1 again. Slip marker and purl 1. If we just set this down here. Now here's my gusset right here that I'm starting to form. So once again, let's bring that other mid in. So we're creating this triangle here of fabric. And so the reason you might notice that when I was working the gusset, we worked and left 1 more purl on the other side of the gusset. So basically I did that. So the thumb gusset would come right between each purl stitch in this purl 2 that's right here. So it's like right in the middle. So that's just a nice little detail that it's centered. And then when we go back, which I'm going to show you in just a second, how to join back up to finish the top. Again, that purl 2 is just lining up nice and centered on the thumb. So that's just a nice little detail that I liked for this particular pattern. So that's why I included it. Okay, so now I have a little swatch here in a slightly different blue yarn, but now we're going to be ready to work the hand. Oh, let's see. Joanne asks, so increasing for the gusset every other row. Yes, Joanne, that is correct. So basically what happens is I just showed you how to do round 3 where we did those make 1 stitches again. And then round 4 is just work in established pattern to marker, slip the marker, knit to the next marker, slip marker, and purl 1. So yes, you are increasing every other row. So the first stitch you do, the first increase you do, you just do a single make 1 because we need to make 1 stitch to start our gusset. So that's round 1 of the gusset. And then every other round you're increasing by 2. So you did your make 1 to make 1 stitch. The next round you would just knit that stitch. Then round 3 you do make 1, knit 1, make 1. Round 4 you just knit them all. Then when you keep going, the next round would be make 1, knit across, which that would be knitting across your 3 stitches. Then make 1. Next round, you would just be knitting across those stitches. So yes, that's exactly how it's written in the pattern. It says repeat the last 2 rounds, continuing to work an established pattern another 5 times. So what you're going to end up with is 13 stitches total in between your stitch markers here. So we have 2, 5, 7, 10, 13. And then we have our stitch marker and our final purl. This is somewhere else where you can adapt your pattern. You know, when I'm doing a fingerless mitt pattern, I'm really kind of just looking at the average size of somebody's thumb. I actually kind of have small, like skinnier thumbs, but everybody's, you know, everybody's body is different. Everybody's anatomy is different. So if your fingers are, if your thumb is really thin and small, maybe you don't want to do all the way up to 13 stitches. You don't have to. Just keep in mind that it's going to affect obviously the size of your thumb if you're making this part smaller, or even if you're making it bigger. If you wanted to make this for someone that had a larger hand, you might want to do a couple extra rounds here. The main thing is that you're going to want to keep working an established pattern. If you're making any of these changes to the gusset as far as the size goes, I have told you, okay, we're working an established pattern. But I have given you some clues in the pattern. If you're following the pattern exactly, I'm like, okay, we're working an established pattern. This will be round 3 when we start the gusset. Now, what I'm going to show you next, we're going to be starting round 1, which is working an established pattern. But I just want to point out, as I'm telling you about these changes that you can make, you need to make sure you're still working in that established pattern of these 4 rounds. So if you change something like the size of your gusset, just keep in mind, you have to maintain this same patterning here. So when I'm giving those clues in the pattern of, oh, this will be round 3, this will be round 1, obviously that's if you're following the pattern exactly. Okay, so now we're coming to the hand here, and we're ready to hold off our stitches for our thumbs. So we're working an established pattern. So as written, that's a round 1. So I've slipped 1 with yarn in back, knit 2, pass the slip stitch over the knit 2. And so I'm just doing that all the way over to where my thumb gusset is. And yes, this also is a 24-inch circular as well. So the 24-inch, like I was saying, Margaret, is it works pretty good if you have a really small project like this, but for a full-size mitt, I probably would go with at least the 32-inch circular. That's what I used when I made the actual project. Okay, so we're almost to our gusset. Okay. So now we're to our marker. The pattern says remove marker, place next 13 stitches on holder or waste yarn. So we'll remove our marker, and I have my waste yarn here. I like the waste yarn because it's not bulky and I can just cut it when I'm done with it. And I'm also using some of my leftovers from another project. So I'm just going to cut a length of yarn here. I tend to cut mine pretty long. Obviously we only have 13 stitches, but I like to tie my waste yarn into a knot. So, and I'll show you that in just a sec. So I'm going to load my waste yarn onto a tapestry needle or yarn needle here. And if with your waste yarn, now, of course, in a pinch, could you just grab some off the other end of your ball of yarn and use that as waste yarn? Of course you can, and I've done it many times. But if you're using the same color when it comes time to take your waste yarn out, obviously it's harder to see. It's the same color as your project. So I recommend just using a different color yarn, one that's pretty smooth. This one has like a little fuzz to it, but not too bad. You know, don't use your mohair as waste yarn is the point I'm trying to make. You want something ideally about the same weight of yarn, smooth, and ideally in a different color. And then all I'm going to do is slip the stitches off of the needle and then onto my yarn needle. And I tend to do maybe 3 or 4 stitches at a time, and then just take it onto the yarn. And obviously don't pull the yarn all the way through, because the yarn that I'm slipping through these stitches is what's preventing them from unraveling and dropping a stitch. So there's the rest of them. And this is a pretty pointy tapestry needle. I actually didn't realize that's the one I had pulled out today. But just make sure you're not splitting the stitches as you're bringing that needle through, just because it's going to make it that much harder to get your waste yarn out. So then I tend to just tie just sort of an overhand knot business here. I go through a couple times. And then I like to knot it just like this, because now my stitches can't fall off. You know, this is a pretty long length of yarn. So in theory, you can just leave it hanging down. But you know, I'm somebody that just like will throw my knitting wherever, throw it into my bag. So now these 13 stitches that I'm holding are nice and secure. They're tied by the loop and now they're out of my way. And again, you could use like a larger form of these locking stitch markers. I don't think I have any over here nearby, but you could also get the little stitch holders that are very short. But this I like because it keeps my fabric nice and flexible, so it stays out of the way really easily. So now that I've held off those stitches, the last instruction was to remove that other marker, which we did, and then we need to purl that last stitch. And so here's where we've joined everything back up. And sometimes it does look a little bit like this looks a little bit loose here. Do not worry about it. We're just joining everything back up. We're going to be picking stitches up in here. And so you won't even be able to tell later that we joined it up like that. It'll all just come together. And we'll also have another yarn tail here later. So we can always use that tail if you do end up with a hole. We'll just use that tail to weave it in later. And so then you would just keep working the pattern as established. So now we are on round 2 because we had just done a round 1. And you would just keep going. So at this point, you would just continue following the pattern. You're going to work a few more rounds of the mock cable rib, and then you are going to just go back to working that ribbing round. So let me just finish off this round 2. And again, the pattern will tell you exactly how many rounds you need to work. So I'm going to just work one more round and then we'll talk about the bind off here. So after you work the mock cable rib the specified number of times, you're then going to work the ribbing round for 4 rounds, which is just what we did at the beginning, which is knit 3, purl 2. And we're just working that all the way around. And you would do that for your mitt a total of 4 rounds. And again, this is somewhere where you can adjust the pattern if you have the extra yarn. Some people, let me bring the mitt back in here. Some people like to make the ribbing especially extra long on their fingerless mitt. And the reason being is then you can fold it like a cuff and have it so when you have that extra ribbing, it can come up over your fingers, or then you can fold it down so your fingers are free. So it's almost like the mittens that, you know, the convertible mittens that have the flap where you can, you know, fold them over or button them back. I guess it's sort of the same thing for fingerless mitts. If you want, you could make the ribbing extra long and then fold it back, and it's still open no matter what, but it would provide a little bit of extra warmth there. So just an idea if you have some extra yarn on hand. Okay, so once you've worked the specified number of ribbing rounds, you're ready to bind off, and the pattern tells us to bind off loosely in pattern. So if you are a person who binds off tightly, you might want to grab a slightly larger needle, especially because we're working with cotton here. That bind off, I find sometimes can get a little tight. So you might want to grab a larger needle to use as your right needle, or just don't really pull down on your stitches too tight. And we're going to bind off in pattern by working the stitches as they are presented. So that was a knit stitch, that was a knit stitch. Now we're going to pass it over. So it's like doing a regular bind off. Next stitch is a knit. We're going to knit, pass it over. Next stitch was a purl. So we're going to purl and then pass over. So binding off in pattern just simply means that you're continuing the pattern, but also binding off at the same time. So if it looks like a knit, you knit it, then bind off. If it looks like a purl, you purl it and then bind off. And that's all there is to binding off in pattern. But again, it's just a nice little extra detail that makes your bind off just flow from the actual pattern a little bit better, a little more seamlessly, I guess. Because if we made these all knit stitches, then you would have knit stitches above the purls. And that's not what we want. We want to try to maintain that ribbing all the way up to the top. So now I'm just doing the second half here. And then we can quickly talk about the thumb. Again, the binding off in pattern is really pretty easy. It's just remembering to take a look at your knitting and maintain that ribbing pattern while also binding off. Okay, almost there. Oops, lost a stitch there. Let's just pick that back up. I want to drop a stitch right when we come to the end, right? We're almost done. Okay, so we have one stitch left on our needle. So we can cut the yarn. And I always just pull that loop right through there. Okay, so you're left, obviously I have a very mini mitten here, but you would just be left with this, and then your stitches are hanging out here on your thumb. And so now to do the thumb, we need to transfer the stitches from the waist yarn or stitch holder to the double pointed needles, or in this case, my magic loop. So what, or my needle for my magic loop. So what I'm going to do is, notice I have left the waist yarn in my stitches while I'm doing this. It just makes it so much easier, because then if you do mess it up somehow, you still have that waist yarn in there. So ultimately, we're going to pick up some stitches. Ultimately, we're going to end up with 18. So I'm trying to set it up so that I'll end up with 9 on each needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. And then I'll pick up these last 4, not really pick up, I'm just slipping them back onto the needle. And here you can see, I just want to point this out quickly, that this last stitch, often when you're using the waist yarn, it will try to start working its way down, but you don't have to panic because you have the waist yarn in there. Especially this last stitch, sometimes you need to give it a pull, or even just stick your needle in there to make sure you're picking up the right stitch. And that's just a product of, as you're knitting, you know, and this is just sitting on waist yarn, it wants to try to fall down, but it can't because you have that waist yarn in there. So now I have all my 13 stitches back on my needle, so I can go ahead and cut my waist yarn, and hopefully we'll be able to just pull that waist yarn right out. We didn't split any stitches, which we didn't, came right out. So now we're done with that waist yarn. So the next step is to pick up and knit 5 stitches in the gap where the thumb meets the hand. So this is where we had, after we had put the stitches on the stitch holder and then we started working in the round again, it's this gap right here. And depending, you know, on how tight you did things or loose, you know, this doesn't necessarily always look perfect, but when we pick up the stitches, we can do some things that really help clean this up. So let me grab, actually, you know what? I'm just gonna grab the other blue. It's not that different, but maybe that'll help us be able to see just a little bit better what's going on here. Just having a little bit of contrast. So you would obviously keep using your same color, but here I'm just gonna grab this contrasting one, or slightly contrasting one. And now we need to pick up and knit. So when I'm picking up 5 stitches, I like to try to not necessarily work all of them across this way. I like to try to pick up one of them sort of above. And this is one of those things where this is more of an art than a science thing when it comes to this particular part of knitting. And just over time, you figure out how you like to pick up and knit your stitches. So I'm leaving a tail, and you might want to leave a slightly longer tail here in case you do end up with kind of any unsightly hole you want to weave in. And I'm just going to pick up by going under the strands and then bringing my loop through. So that's one picked up. And now I'm just working across 2. And you'll have a little bit more fabric here to work with. Since I cut it, my little swatch shorter, there's less just fabric in general to work with, but you'll have more fabric here too, which will make it easier. That's 3. Nope, that was 2. This is 3. There's 3. Then we'll start coming this way. 4 and 5. So you can see those were my stitches that I had put on hold for my thumb gusset. And then here are my new ones that I picked up. And now we're ready to start working in the round. And this is why I do really prefer Magic Loop, especially for something like this. Doing this with double pointed needles works fine. And I've made many thumbs with double pointed needles, but to me, this is a lot less cumbersome to use the Magic Loop. And so now I would just make sure I got my working yarn and not that tail. And then we're just going to continue following the pattern. And so now you're going to knit for 6 rounds. So it's just plain old knitting. Every stitch is knit for 6 rounds. And then you're going to do 4 rounds of knit 2, purl 1. And then you're going to bind off in pattern. And so that's the same thing as we did at the top of the mitt, where you're going to maintain that knit 2, purl 1, while also binding off. And so that's all there is to it. And then here I've come to my new stitches that I had picked up and knit. You're just knitting those 2. And here, this first one here, where we had added in the new yarn, it is a little bit loose, and it might be a little hard to see here. It's a little bit loose, but you can pull on your tail here. You can use this longer tail to weave in or close up any little hole, but you would just keep working the thumb just like that. So really it's the picking up and knitting part that's the hardest, but then you just finish off your thumb. Now, of course, after you've made the first one, now you got to make the second one. So that's sometimes the hardest part about some of these projects, is once you've made one, you have to make a second. It's kind of like a second sock. You have to make a second mitt. But as you can see, they're so fun. They're so bright and cheery. They're going to be perfect for the remainder of the summer, going into fall. Like I said here, I have used 1 ball of yarn for this particular size, so mine are not totally matching. But if you want yours to match, you can just get a second ball of the yarn and make them so they match. You also obviously could use a lot of other different types of yarn as well. You know, one that's more of a traditional self-striping yarn would look great with this. I just would stay away from anything that is super variegated. I would go with something more stripy, just because of this mock cable pattern. If your yarn's really variegated, you might not really be able to see the pattern, and we don't want that. So before we go, I see one more question from Margaret. Could you mount them on a cable needle? And so I'm assuming that that means the stitches for the gusset. And the answer is yes, you absolutely could use a cable needle or even a spare double pointed needle to hold those stitches. The way you hold the stitches really does come down to personal preference. So for me, I find if I use a cable needle to hold those stitches off, it just kind of gets in my way as I'm knitting. And I think it's just the particular way that I happen to hold my needles. It becomes a little bit cumbersome. So that's why I like the waste yarn, because everything just kind of flops down. There's nothing rigid or anything holding my stitches. So I can just sort of hold my needles in the normal way. But absolutely, you could use a cable needle. Even these smaller locking stitch markers, I had mentioned using a larger locking stitch marker. But even in a pinch, and when I say in a pinch, it's usually I'm too lazy to get off the couch. I might even take some of these locking stitch markers. And even if I have 13 stitches in this case that I need to hold off to finish the thumb, maybe I cram 6 onto one and 7 onto the other. Maybe I grab a third one and put, 4, 4, and 5 or something. I mean, not ideal, obviously, but in a pinch, even these little guys will work. So there's lots of different ways that you can put your stitches on hold, but Yes, cable needle will absolutely work. So that's it for me for today. I really hope that you enjoyed learning how to make these fingerless mitts with me. Don't forget to check out the description for this video and download that pattern if you haven't done so already. And before I go, I just want to remind everybody, if you do decide to go ahead and make this pattern, we would love to see it. And there's a few different places that you can, post your project. So obviously, if you're on social media, you can always tag us on Facebook and Instagram. If you're not on social media and you want to share your picture, we actually have a project gallery section of our website, and it's a really fun place to go just to get inspiration. And so viewers like you and people who use our website can upload their photo, and it doesn't have to be even for a project that is on our website or project we're currently working on. You can share any knitting project you want and share a little detail and post it on the project gallery page of our website. So that's another great place where you can connect with other knitters and see what they're up to. So absolutely, if you make these mitts, please do let us know, and be sure to tag us on social media or check out that project gallery on our Knitting Circle website. So thank you everybody for watching today. I hope that you enjoyed learning how to make these fingerless mitts with me, and happy knitting, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.